Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So today's video we are covering chords and arpeggios. So what's a chord? A chord is, very simply put, a collection of notes that sound good when played simultaneously. So last time we talked about scales, which were a group of notes that that sound pretty good when you just play them in sequence. And it doesn't really matter so much what the sequence is. Now, chords on the other hand are different because it's playing the notes simultaneously like that, and then you could kind of do interesting chord progressions like I don't know, things like that. So so how do you make a chord? It's actually pretty darn easy. If you remember this one pattern, and it sounds like one of those things online, you know, like, just remember this one thing, but really is. We'll start at C, because once again, it's the easiest one. You start at C, and then you move up 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up till you get 7 notes from your first note. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7. So you end up with this. Pretty simple there. Remember that, and you can put it anywhere, and that is your major chord. And then you also have minor chords, which are very similar, except you move the middle key down 1. Now, you're probably wondering right now to yourself, so how do I know if I'm supposed to use a major or minor chord? Well, it's partially taste and partially whether or not it's in key. So if you remember, if we are in a C major key, we have all the white notes are available. And please apologize, skipped or missed notes, because my keyboard sucks. So if we try this C minor chord here, you'll notice this note is no longer in key. So that means we cannot actually play C minor in this key. We have to play C major if we're going to play a C chord. Oh, by the way, naming conventions are the exact same with scales. It's just the starting note when you do this pattern. So for instance, if I want to do D minor, I just start on D. And then do the minor pattern, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because I can't do a major chord here because the black key is no longer in our song key. So remember that. It's all about, you know, when it comes to chords, it's all about remembering the key you're in and making sure you don't go out of it when you're creating a chord progression. So simply speaking, if you go into your piano roll here and you just start keying in notes. So this is our basic major chord that I talked about. You know, you have the first one, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Boom. That is our major chord. Now, I can move this anywhere. There we go. So now it is a G sharp chord. Now you'll notice this one is almost completely out of key. We have this black note here, this black note here. So it's better off just choosing a different chord. So we'll move it down by 1. And now you'll notice we are back in key. So so that's, you know, really simply, when you get this pattern, you just have to move it anywhere. Now, let me get one more example here. So if I move this to D, then you'll notice almost all my notes are in key here, except for this one. This one's kind of being a bit of a turd. So what we could do with this one is we could change this major chord to a minor chord to make it so it is now in key, because we could do that. So we have a major chord and we can move it down to make it a minor chord. Or similarly, we can move this anywhere right about, I don't know, what's a good example? Here. There we go. And because that's our C major chord. But we can take this minor chord, move it up to a major, and then we're back in key again. So learn that one pattern and then apply it all over the place, and you have a bunch of chords available right off the bat. Now, there's a few other things we could do. So I'm going to pull this back up. The first one that I want to mention, and this one's a pretty common one, is when you have these chords, these major chords, you could actually move the middle one up 1, and you get what's called a sus chord. And it complements itself very well. So if you're in key, then you could do that, and it turns out pretty well. So for example, That's another one that's in key. But if I try to do this on some other ones, like, let's see, here's a good example. This is another major chord in key, but if I move it up one, it's still sounds good together, but it's not in key anymore because we're hitting this note. So remember, the sus chords are pretty neat, but make sure you stay in key if you want to try to do that. And then finally for chords, the last one I'm going to talk about is inversions. So we have the C major chord here. What happens if I take this top note and move it an octave down? Then I get this, which sounds pretty darn close, but just a little bit lower. So this is what is called an inversion, when you take some of the notes and you move them up or down octaves to kind of adjust the sound a little bit. It's still the same chord, it's just a little bit harder to identify because the first note is not telling you what chord it is anymore. It is now this note. So when you go out of your main pattern, it gets a little bit harder to identify chords, but still, it's in key, so it doesn't matter that much. And, you know, we could do this with any of the notes on this one. So we could go, for example, we could do this. And that's still a C major chord. So it's just been inverted to all heck. Now, trance does a lot of chord inversions. And I think Progressive House does quite a few as well. Just because it makes things sound bigger when you spread out the chord all over the place. So instead of just doing these simple plain chords that quite frankly everyone's sick of by now because they've heard so many of, that's why it sounds so boring on this. What they'll do instead is they'll move around the different spots and you know, for instance, they'll do something like this, which is a lot fancier than this. So inversions are really fun. Play with those. They're great. And I did say that was going to be the last type of chord I'm covering, and that is kind of true, but I also want to, you know, just put it out there. There are a whole bunch of other combinations you could do. For instance, if you have this chord, you can move the last one up one, and you have a different type of chord there. And similarly, you could just do a whole bunch of different combinations to come up with cool stuff. And there are names for a whole ton of these, but quite frankly, I don't know them. I don't care because I use them and I just go by ear. I don't look them up every time. So just remember, when in doubt, use your basic major or minor chords, depending on which ones are in key. And then kind of shimmy notes around to make it sound a little bit cooler, give it some flavor and stuff like that. So you could do crazy inversions and then, you know, move a note around so it's no longer the exact same chord anyway. So that'll give you a lot of variety and a lot to work with. So the last thing I want to do before wrapping up today's video is talk about arpeggios, because arpeggios are pretty stinking close to chords. So what you have is you have your regular chord, and then you can arpeggiate that chord. Or similarly, so that means an arpeggio is basically taking a chord and playing the notes sequentially. It's different from a melody because it always follows a chord pattern and it doesn't move out of it that much. I mean, it might deviate just a little bit, but for the most part, it sticks inside that chord there. Also do want to mention here, chords are not necessarily limited to 3 notes. They could be 4 notes. I think, if I recall correctly, that's also a chord there. And so you could do some crazy stuff with chords. But anyway, so back to our arpeggios. So a very popular example of this is if I take this this progression here. Let's see if I could do it right. That might be recognizable. But if I turn it into arpeggio, it'll be very recognizable. If I can play it right. I stink at playing, so. So, if that's recognizable to you, then hopefully I played it well enough. But it kind of doesn't help that my keyboard sucks. But anyway, so that's like, you know, the difference that you have when you just have a regular chord progression, and then instead you arpeggiate that chord progression. So instead of just holding the notes, now I can't play it at all. Hitting the wrong stuff. But instead of just holding the notes, you could arpeggiate them. So that's the chord progression, and then arpeggiate the notes, and you get the very popular song that makes up. So, but anyway, there's a lot of fun stuff you could do with this. Look around, just try to come up with cool chords, and all you have to do is remember, you know, here's a great starting idea. If you have your starting note of your key, choose any note, boom, that note, then you make a scale off of it so you know which notes you have available, and then you make a very simple note progression. So it goes like, so that's a very simple pattern going on there. It's not too amazing. But then what you could do is you could make chords out of it. Now, I don't know which chords to use because I'm not familiar with this scale. I'd have to actually lay it out. But you can make some sort of... That is not a chord. Oh gosh, that's what happens when you don't play it right. And then this note doesn't really work on my keyboard, so... but... You know, terrible example aside, the whole purpose is, you know, once you get those individual notes planned out in some sort of pattern, you could just turn them into chords using the patterns here, using either a major chord or a minor chord. And then if you want, you could invert it as well to kind of give it some flavor. So that'll get you well on your way to creating really cool chord progressions and stuff. So hopefully that was helpful. I know that there were quite a few times that I messed up examples in here, but quite frankly, I've tried to do this video a couple times, and every single time I screw up something. It probably has something to do with the fact that A, I can't play piano, so I shouldn't be doing this, and B, my keyboard sucks, so I shouldn't be using it. So anyway, hopefully this has helped for you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.